And so you click, and they're playing it in a strange way. Maybe they're bunny hopping all over the place. Maybe they're doing some seemingly random movement, and then the credits pop up out of nowhere. Or maybe they're just playing it really darn well. And, well, you could be one of the many folks who reject it, who say, that's not how I want to play the game, or that looks like cheating. There's plenty of evidence to show that lots of people react that way, but I think if you're all here, you're the type of person who wanted to understand more, who was curious. So you went on a search, maybe. You search the web, you look at the description, the comments, and I want you to think, what did you find at the time, or what would you have found at the time? What would you find today, and what could you find in the future? So why do we care about this? Speedrunning communities, we generate a lot of information, and we discover a lot of information about the games that we play, the glitches, tricks, and skips that we discover and implement, the version and language differences for the games that we play, the routes for the categories that we come up with, the beginner guides to introduce people to our games, the tutorials for how to do specific segments and tricks and skips, and the game and category rules by which we compete. Communities also have history in and of themselves. Stuff like the people who are part of those communities, the runners, the glitch hunters, the reverse engineers, and anyone else, even just the folks who are chatting and lurking in our chats and discords. The world records that are taken, the route changes that occur, the milestones that are achieved, and the events that we host, the races, the marathons, the charity exhibitions, and all. But also this information, well, it can be hard to find and it can be easy to lose. So a lot of this information, stuff we might really care about, is buried in old forums, Twitter posts, paste bins, Discord discussions, the titles, descriptions, and comment sections of random YouTube videos. Some things you could only really find out about if it was remembered by a particular person and they happen to be around when you ask. If you're coming into one of these communities as an outsider, you really don't know any of this stuff, and it can be hard to get a grip on where you even start. And search engines can be unhelpful, to say the least. Some of this information isn't indexed at all, like what's inside Discords or Google Docs. And some of it might just not pop up very well in search engines. And of course, there are many ways that information can just disappear and become inaccessible. Sometimes you click on a link to a website and it's just not there. The server was taken down long ago and replaced with some unrelated nonsense. Posts can be deleted, accounts can be made private, videos can be DMCA'd. Over time, maybe you find a page that has a bunch of links to other resources, but all or most of those links are dead. That's something we call link rot, which tends to happen over time. Sometimes the people who know stuff, they just leave the community or simply forget. So I want to talk about my story, just briefly, insofar as it's relevant. I first started speedrunning, actually, only in 2019 when I played Okami. I played the game casually. I thought, that seems like the kind of game I could speedrun. So I found the speedrun.com page, I looked at the guide section, I found a route, and I tried to start running, and I got stuck. The route was not written for someone like me. It was basically an abbreviated notes for someone who already knew how you played most segments of the run. They just needed reminders of a couple things. So I could have easily bounced at that point. I had a hard time getting started, didn't seem like there was anything available to really get me going. But I had a lot of energy at that point. I had a lot of enthusiasm, and I decided to put that forward into making a guide by and for a beginner. So I made a guide in Google Docs as the New Game Any % Beginner Route Guide. I filled it with lots of images, lots of in-game maps, diagrams, and detailed step-by-step explanations for how you're supposed to do stuff that would be kind of redundant for someone who already knew most of the game mechanics, but would be very helpful for a newbie. And even though that guide hasn't been as up-to-date as I would like, it's still useful today because it just goes over so many fundamental aspects from such a good perspective. We also had a wiki at the time, but it had maybe a dozen pages on it, and they were all very brief. So me and several other community members, new and old, we cooperated to help build that out, and now there's well over 100 pages, and it's a very thorough wiki with a lot of good interconnection. I got a lot of help from the existing community members, both new and old. who shared their knowledge and who shared their effort. And I'm really proud of what we have today. So, just briefly, I want you to think, what was it like for you when you first got started, whether or not you actually are a runner or just a community member who's interested, and what is it like right now, and where could it go in the future? So how do we bring this about? How do we improve this situation? The most important thing that we're trying to achieve is making information available. We want to collect information together. Information might already be collected in certain places, stuff like the resources channels and Discords, Google Sheets, Docs, YouTube playlists, old forum posts like I mentioned before. You might already or might want to build things like static HTML pages through free services like GitHub, GitLab, Cloudflare, and NeoCities. And the thing that I want to focus on a lot today are wikis through software like MediaWiki. And there are also other tools you could use to collect information, which might have their pros and cons, and you might already be in one of these places, stuff like the guides and resources sections on speedrun.com, custom websites like Zelda speedruns, Halo runs, Minecraft runs, stratdb.app. This is a relatively new web app created by an Ocarina of Time runner called Denny B, where it's very explicitly focused on connecting new and old players, people who might not really know much about the game, or at least not know much about speedrunning, with videos specifically on how to do tricks. So if someone sees something that they don't understand, they can figure out from context exactly what they want to know. And you can even use other tools for hosting web content like Card or any service that lets you host markdown documents like GitHub, Reddit, Cohost, and so on. Regardless of the exact services that we choose to host our information, there's a few ideals I think we should strive for. Discoverability and searchability. This is the notion that, like I said, information should be available. It should be findable for people who might not know exactly where to look or even what exactly they're looking for. It should be accessible to search engines. Search engines aren't the perfect tool, but just having something be indexed at all is a great step forward in getting it found. Resources, whether they're all in one place or all across many places, should be cross-linked. Anything that can connect to something else should, so that people, if someone finds one thing, they can find all the other things, all the other places that your information is. And this is a major issue for things like Discord and Google Docs, which, like I said before, are not indexed. Community contributions, I think, is very valuable. You might have a lot of enthusiasm now for building up this kind of information, but for better or worse, that may not last forever. So it helps when many people can combine their efforts to make a better resource. This also helps people to work at their own pace so that they're less likely to get burnt out and more likely to start contributing in the first place. Anything we build, I'd like to say, should be able to be backed up and preserved. Like I said, websites can go down, servers can be stopped paying for. You might lose a URL. When something's just on a basic web page, we fortunately have great tools for preserving it through web archival services like web.archive.org or archive.is. And many of the tools that I've described are built in with archival tools like forking and cloning GitHub repositories and the export-import features of MediaWiki. And also, for something that is as big a project as a whole repository of knowledge, I think it should be transferable from one person or group to another. If one person decides after however long they've put in the effort that they no longer want to steward a service, they shouldn't feel forced to. They should be able to smoothly and peacefully transition that to another person who's willing to take up the mantle. You might already have a resource like this, and if so, I'd say the best way to begin is to contribute. You might not have to start from scratch. You can already build up and improve what's there. You can, if you know things that aren't already written down, write them down. Maybe if it's, even if it's not the ideal form, just having things written down in the first place is a great way to get going and can be used in the future. If you don't know things, you can ask people who do, and you can be the one that records their answers, since obviously putting things into writing is work in and of itself. You can be the one who tests and research things. You can be the one who labs things in-game, or does the sort of journalistic work of going out into old forums or talking to folks and assembling information together. You can be the person who motivates others to contribute, even if you're not the one doing it yourself, or even if you're not doing most of the contribution. If you can start projects that encourage others to do it, that's in and of itself valuable. And I think anyone can really do this. You don't have to be a runner. You don't have to have really any level of expertise. As long as you're willing to learn and willing to share that knowledge, you can be a very valuable member of your community. In terms of connecting people to resources, the number one thing is to link things together. If you have a wiki or a central website, link that in your speedrun.com page or your Discord or your IRC server, and link those places to each other just as well, in both directions. When someone comes about, say in your Discord server, and asks a question, show them where they can find the answer in your central resource. And if it's not already there, put it there. Make the resources you create the easiest and most obvious place to find answers, so that people are encouraged not only to go to those places, but to improve them going forward when things aren't found there. I do have some examples of wikis and similar services that are already out there that you might want to take some inspiration from. Super Mario 64 has Wikipedia, which also has a lot of task-related information on it. The whole Donkey Kong Country series has the DKC Speedruns website. Pizza Tower has a wiki, which is hosted on a wiki forum, something I'll talk about a little later, called wiki.gg. Okami Speedruns.wiki, that's the game that I play and the wiki that I contribute to. That's okami.speedruns.wiki. And in terms of something that isn't a media wiki, Ocarina of Time 3D on zeldaspeedruns.com. This was pointed out to me as one of the better examples of a Zelda wiki on Zelda speedruns on ZSR. And that's in part because it was built up as things were being discovered. The website already existed when the game came out, and people were recording their knowledge as they went along, which made it a lot smoother. This doesn't mean you can't record things retroactively, but it does mean that it helps to record things as you learn them. So what kinds of things can we put in our central repositories of information? An obvious place to start is where everyone starts: the introductory materials, the beginner route guides. When someone's just finished a game casually, for example, or has just noticed that a game they've played casually has a cool speedrun and they're interested in learning, you should provide them a ramp to get on board. If they have a specific version of the game, maybe you should tell them, can you run with this version? Is there something you should know about running with this version? Maybe there's certain categories that are more appropriate for the version that they have. Do they need a specific version or console or other hardware in order to run? If you have multiple categories, I'd encourage you to sell people on those categories, similar to trying to sell a games committee on a speedrun for a marathon. If someone's new to the community, they might not know that a certain category is cool and interesting, and they might choose one that maybe is less interesting to them and bounce. So try and encourage people to try everything. And the rules of your community, they might make a lot of sense to people who've been there for a while, but some things you just need to give a beginner-friendly explanation for. Now, this is something I've touched on quite a lot already: glitch and trick explanations. If you have something in your game that's being done in the speedrun and it's maybe outside the bounds of normal gameplay, you should explain it. Explain what your trick is, what it does, what's being skipped, how much time is being saved, when you're saving time and when you're losing time, when it's useful to do. Link to other pages that explain related tricks or underlying mechanics. Link to video demonstrations. If you have even just a clip out of a run that shows what the trick actually is, I'd say that's very important to have there. Something that maybe a lot of people don't think about is the history of tricks and glitches. If you know who discovered something when, and you have a link to exactly where that discovery was announced, put that in, and maybe even share a mirror of that thing just in case it ever goes down. This also ties into the cross-linking aspect that I was describing earlier. By connecting these articles within a single wiki together, or other resource, you help people find things. If they find one article on a related thing, they can find every other. Route guides, I think, are very valuable to have in your central repositories. Google Docs is great for a lot of things, but it is difficult for maintainability. If one person makes a nice route guide and then they stop maintaining it, another person has to maintain it, but then the link changes and people might look at the old route guide and not realize there's a newer version. For any kind of route, you should obviously explain the rules. Try to go over every segment step by step. Maybe if you want to have something that's just an abbreviated note form, provide that as an additional page. But make sure that you have something that's at least accessible to someone who's basically familiar with the speed game. Provide a table of contents for easy navigation. This is something MediaWiki handles automatically for you on sufficiently long pages. If you ever have, say, an area that you need to navigate in a particular way, provide a map for the in-game movement. Provide screenshots, provide diagrams, and link to video demonstrations for segments, maybe stuff that isn't covered by the individual page for a trick. And of course, share if there's relevant files, splits, practice tools, auto splitters, share that too. And if you have older versions of the route, or maybe other alternative versions of the route that include or exclude specific tricks, share those as their own pages and link them all together. Even when something isn't outside the bounds of regular gameplay, you can still go into it in depth, study it, find out exactly how it works, and share that knowledge. This is a great place to mix casual and technical language, so that if someone really wants to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly how, say, what the numbers are for damage values, or for your health or boss values, or the specific way resources are consumed, they can find that out. If you have a lot of jargon, and any speed game is likely to develop a lot of jargon over time for just basic mechanics all the way to specific tricks, maybe centralize all that information into a glossary and link out to your pages for anything that has a more in-depth article. If there's alternate terms that are used, maybe one person calls a trick one thing, another person calls it the other thing, share those related terms so that anyone can control F and find exactly what they're curious about. And try and find a way you can link people directly to a specific term in your glossary, if there's ever a question. If you are doing any kind of reverse engineering work in your game, maybe note down that information somewhere in a way that's accessible. Maybe you have a cheat engine table somewhere, but that cheat engine table doesn't have really great descriptions of what an address does or how that pertains to certain in-game mechanics. Note that down. Provide explanations of the in-game values, structures, units that are measuring things, the bit fields, the identifiers. If you have collision visualizations for anything, especially if it's relevant to some kind of trick, share that and make that accessible from the places where it's most useful. Explain how these programming details affect the way the game actually works. And if you have external tools and repositories like cheat engine tables, reclass.net structures, Ghidra files, share those. And of course, as with all things dubious, don't get your central resource cease and desisted or DMCA'd by sharing in-game assets. Just don't. If you have anything, like I said earlier, community history stuff, events that you're hosting, if your game has ever been in a marathon or a charity event, or you've done races, if you've shared in-game polls, if you've done rule changes and you want to know exactly when it happened, why a rule was changed, what the fallout was, put that information into your wiki. If you ever introduce new categories, explain why and when and how a category was introduced. And even stuff as storied as a world record history, you can make an article on that before someone bothers to have to do all the independent research themselves to make a video. If you have a wiki and it's looking a little sparse and you want to build it out, MediaWiki fortunately provides some very useful tools for helping you to do that. If you have nothing on the wiki, you can start with very basic pages. Anytime you could link to another page, whether or not that page exists, simply surround that page's title with a couple square brackets. In MediaWiki, that'll create a red link, which will, if you click on it, take you to a page where you can just create that page. And you don't have to do that right away. You can use things like special wanted pages, which lists out all of the pages that are linked to but don't exist yet, and you can prioritize which ones you want to create. You can also use the short pages special page, which will list you out all the stubs in your wiki, and you can see what's useful to expand. If resources are already out there, but they're spread out, or they're not in the most accessible form, like they're on your Discord, or they're on Google Docs or Pastebin, like I said, put that information all together in one good place, like a media wiki. If you have a new trick that's discovered, maybe try and create that article for it, or update the article for it right away, and include the video. If someone ever asks a question and you think the answer should be on the wiki, but it is, but it's not in the first place you look, like the name is different from what you remember it being, make a redirect from one place to the other so that it's easier to find next time. Now, of course, I think a lot of folks who are showing up are, they don't already have something like a media wiki, or maybe they have something but it's not exactly what they're looking for. And I want you to know you can help or be the one to start from scratch. You can get the ball rolling. It's hard. It's certainly not something I'm going to go in great depth into in this talk, but it is possible, and there's already good resources out there for how to do it. Even if you don't think you have the technical knowledge how to, you can learn, and even if you don't want to learn, you can certainly ask for help. And I'd encourage you to do so either way. If you know someone who's started a wiki, or maybe you just have some related community to your own and they have a wiki, you can ask them, how did they get started? Is there someone around who still knows how to do this kind of stuff and can assist? Or maybe even host your wiki as part of a little farm. You can be the motivating force for others to learn, or for others to take on roles in managing this sort of project, even if you're not the one doing all the heavy lifting. And as soon as even a little bit gets started, it's a lot easier to continue. Now, besides things like MediaWiki, there's other tools that might be a little easier to get started with, stuff like static HTML. And this stuff might be useful, even if you have a wiki, for very particular applications. These are free ways you can host content on the web, which is, maybe a little mundane in today's world of social media platforms, but I'd say it's a lot better than a social media platform in a lot of ways. You have a lot more control. You can put any kind of content that you want. As long as your content's fairly simple, it'll load extremely fast, basically anywhere in the world. The basics on how to code a web page in HTML and CSS, it's remarkably easy to learn. And if you want to implement even pretty complex behavior in the browser on a static web page, you can do so with JavaScript. The downside is that there are some things that are not possible when you're using these static HTML hosting services. Stuff that you would need a back-end server to do. Stuff like having people be able to log in directly through the website themselves, and implementing revision history and community contributions. That's not to say that you can't use the services underlying tools for that, like Git, for things like GitHub and GitLab. Which is pretty powerful. It just means that people will have to use those services instead of being able to work directly within your own limitations. And of course, anytime you do implement complex behavior on the web, you're responsible for it if you're coding it yourself. And that might be good or might be bad, depending on how much you like JavaScript. There are some great examples out there of good things that have been achieved in static HTML, things that I think wouldn't even be appropriate for a wiki, and that it's good that they're done on their own pages. LiveSplit actually has its own web version of this classic speedrun timer, and it's actually remarkably mature at this point. It's I'd say, a perfectly satisfactory substitute for the desktop version. Ocarina of Time has its bingo page, and there's a lot of variants of this. You can even implement this for your own game if you are in it to provide a lot of objectives. This is a whole new way to play a game that's sort of connected to speedrunning but goes beyond it. For Wind Waker, there's a online calculator for a particular minigame that's only relevant in like 100%, but they managed to reverse engineer the RNG of the game and provide a basic web interface that lets you optimize a very RNG-heavy minigame. And I myself have created a web app for Okami where it's basically a catalog with images of every single in-game treasure and animal. So you can find out exactly where they are and where you need to go to find them. I have a QR code here, which is just a link to a introductory tutorial on web technologies like HTML and CSS, if you're ever curious and think you want to learn. If you want to set up something like MediaWiki, like I said, I'm not going to give you the step-by-step guide, but there's a few things you might want to think about at the outset, one of which is hosting. There are free ways to host a MediaWiki, namely through things like wiki farms. Mirahees is a good example of a general-purpose free wiki farm that doesn't impose ads, unlike some others. The downside is you're going to be sacrificing some control, some reliability, and some resource allocation. So your pages might not load quite as fast as you'd like. You can pay for hosting through either a dedicated wiki host or through a virtual private server that you install MediaWiki onto. You're going to be doing more work if you install it yourself, but it might save you some money, so just consider that. You can self-host something like MediaWiki if you have the machinery and the know-how to do it. I generally discourage you from doing this, even if it would save you money, and even if you already know how, because it's going to cost you time, no matter how smart you are, and it might inhibit your ability to transfer ownership of things in the long run. You might not want to be the webmaster for your community in several years' time, and your community might not want just you to be the one webmaster. And I have a couple links here to some guides on how to select hosting services and how to install MediaWiki if you ever want to do that. And just at the tail of this panel, we have a bunch of miscellaneous slides that are unrelated topics. Custom domains. If you have anything on the web, it's usually going to be at the host's URL by default, but you can provide your own URL. You do have to buy this, and it's something you have to pay for every year, but it's usually only going to cost you somewhere between $4 to $50 a year, usually closer to $11, and it just depends on exactly what the name of your website is. Most of the services I've already recommended, including a wiki farm like Mirahees, do support custom domains for free, but some you might have to pay a little extra just to support that kind of redirection. If you ever want to buy a domain, you want to buy it from a service called a registrar, and there are a bunch out there. Porkbun is one that I have used. You can also use stuff like GoDaddy, Namecheap, Hover. There's many out there. If you have information on a wiki, you might still want to double check it. Just because something's already written down doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's 100% accurate, and it doesn't mean you can't study and affirm it or disprove it. If something is there but it doesn't have a good video demonstration, you can re-record it. So don't be afraid to go over work that seemingly has already been done. If you do have videos anywhere and you're worried about them disappearing, you can download videos from just about any service with a free tool called YTDLP, but I generally discourage you from re-uploading things that you don't own without asking the person who originally uploaded it first. And I'd also discourage you from uploading videos and other large files directly to servers that you are paying for, because it might cost you a lot in storage and bandwidth in the long run. So maybe try to use YouTube while it's still free. One great way you can connect people with your resources is through stuff like Discord bots. MediaWiki itself has a lot of extensions out there, some of which function as Discord webhook integration. What that means is that they'll post a message in a specific channel in your Discord server every time any kind of edit happens on your wiki, which is great for connecting people or informing people about the work being done on your wiki. You can also use something like a Discord bot which searches the wiki through its fairly basic, no authentication required API, and I have some example code of my own wiki bot which actually works. And just a final little topic, this information, all of the information I've shared with you, I talked about it in the context of speedrunning, but it's not just about speedrunning. Speedrunners are often treated as the experts on the games that we play, and that's not without merit. We have, because of the way we collaborate and compete, an intrinsic incentive to study games in great detail and learn a lot about them. So by collecting all this information, you might find that even people who are not interested in speedrunning at all, people who are, say, challenge runners or just even casual but deeply passionate fans about games are interested in the information you provide and want to know more. So don't be afraid to provide information that's useful to people beyond speedrunning within your speedrunning wikis. And the talents you learn through all of this effort, if you go through with it, they can be useful outside of gaming in general. Any kind of hobby could do with a wiki, in my opinion. And even for professional, academic, or other kinds of organized structures, there are applications for small to large private wikis that host this kind of collaborative information as a form of document control. So don't be afraid to think outside the box and what you can use this knowledge for. So just as a final card, I want to mention not everything can be saved, and that's okay. If you find that something has already been lost, and you're upset that it was lost, that's okay. Some of the things that you try to write down now will be lost. The real world is not about documenting things in wikis. The wikis are in service of the goal of helping and improving our speedrunning communities. And that's okay. So thank you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to hold your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a question about like what you've found were good practices for keeping the wiki tight. Like I can imagine you want a lot of people to contribute, but you also want to be able to curate information so it's useful, right? If it's just a mess of everyone throwing stuff on a wiki page, it's not useful. So do you lock down certain pages and make others anyone can edit, or I guess what's your moderation strategy for keeping the wiki useful?
Yes, the questions repeated is, if I may paraphrase, how do you manage contributions to a wiki in a way that keeps things of a high quality, makes sure the wiki remains useful regardless of how many contributors there are? And there are many approaches for this. If you look at wikis of all sizes, you will see many approaches. Wikipedia, the wiki, the original implementation of MediaWiki. And I want to clarify that. MediaWiki is the software used by Wikipedia. It is good software. You can use it for pretty much anything. But just to answer your question, if you look at Wikipedia, they have a policy by default that anyone can contribute. But if you actually try to contribute to a lot of pages, you'll find that there are heavy restrictions on new accounts or on inauthenticated accounts. And that's for good reason, because they want to prevent something called vandalism, where people deliberately make bad edits to a page. They want to prevent people from making edits that violate their content guidelines in terms of what kinds of things are allowed to be put on Wikipedia. The same kinds of things might apply to your own wikis, but of course at much smaller scales. Personally, I've been very lucky to avoid having to think too hard about this problem because the Okami speedrunning community is relatively small. Our wiki is actually basically invite-only in terms of contributions. If someone asks, they'll almost definitely be granted a role, but they have to ask. So that by itself encourages people to think of themselves as wiki contributors first and foremost at the outset, because they have to ask to get given an account. That might not be appropriate for your community. Maybe you really do need anyone to be able to just jump in and correct something because there's a lot of information and you don't want to have to manage every single account that gets added. And in that case, there are tools built into MediaWiki and built into MediaWiki extensions that can help you, say, patrol edits or provide a sort of reputation system for accounts managed by moderators. I don't want to lead you in the wrong direction. This is not something I'm an expert in, but there are resources out there for how to manage wikis of all sizes. Are there any other questions?
Pretty well-rounded presentation.
Well, I appreciate that. Does anyone want to, you had something?
Sure, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I am the administrator of a custom wiki that uses wiki.js, the Metro Dread speedrunning wiki. If you'd like, I can show a couple pages.
I could maybe search something.
Yeah.
So do you have a URL?
Yes, dreadwiki. Highjumpboots, HIJUMP boots.com.
Okay. I'm trusting you on this. Okay, so I know of wiki.js. I've never used it. So would you mind sharing something?
Sure, yeah. So either the controller research guide or the unrestricted route.
So controller research guide.
Yep. So in our community, we keep a very detailed directory of Nintendo Switch controllers, whether they're good, whether they're bad, what features they have, that kind of thing. There's that, and I guess I kind of want to go into like what it took to like host this. This is hosted on a DigitalOcean droplet that's backed by one of their managed databases. It costs about $30 a month to maintain, or that's the cost of the droplet plus the database hosting. I'm aware that not everybody is able to do this, and you yourself, you said you discouraged like kind of self-hosting because what if I don't want to do this in like 10 years or whatever. To mitigate these sorts of issues, among our admins, we have a bit warden. We have a bit warden vault, which is a password sharing vault that we all share, and if someone leaves, everybody has access to that information, and like the passwords, and most importantly, the one-time pads, screenshots of the one-time pads for the two-factor authentication, so that everybody has those are the codes. But we've done a lot of work over the last year in trying to mitigate the common problems people run into when they self-host.
Okay, so just to paraphrase again, since I'm not sure how much the mic came up. This is hosted on a DigitalOcean droplet, right? For about $30.
Basically shared hosting that
Yeah.
you have a terminal access to.
So shared hosting, it's about $30 a month, right? And multiple people have access to the credentials required to manage the backend.
Yes.
So that's, I'd say, a good solution. Again, I'm not going to say you'll run into problems. I can imagine how making sure that everyone who has access to those credentials is trustworthy. That's something you need to bear in mind whenever you're sharing credentials that let you access something like this. But that applies even to a MediaWiki, right? So this is absolutely something you'll always have to consider, is transferal of ownership or shared ownership. This is an excellent point. This does go to show that self-hosting and using software other than the stuff that I've pointed out or recommended, like wiki.js, it's a valid approach. You just might need different background knowledge. So just bear that in mind. Whatever, you might want to research multiple options and see what works best for you. So thank you.
No worries. Also for Discord, because we do have our own Discord server, and not everything on here is on the Discord server, and vice versa. We do take periodic backups. They're read-only backups of the Discord server using something called Discord Chat Master. And that also works pretty well for us. We're looking at taking those backups and maybe hosting them on certain channels on like a public mirror, like channels that relate to just the game, not just like social channels. Like every Discord, like speedrunning server has like social channels and stuff like that. That may not be, what we want to share. We just want to get at the information itself. But yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. This is a good thing to show. So thank you. With regards to backup systems for stuff like Discord, that's a good point. There do exist ways you can back up and even index a Discord server, and of course you can find all sorts of things that will let you convert Google Docs into other systems. Just bear in mind, like you said, the information in, say, a Discord server might not be of 100% high quality. It might not be a great reference in and of itself. So I would encourage you to provide that information in a structured place. like a wiki of any kind. But thank you. Anyone else want to share something they've worked on or something they want to work on? That's absolutely fine. Thank you all for your attendance. I really appreciate your attention today. And I wish you good luck in applying this knowledge in your own communities.
Thank you.
That's all.